Today's story is about a guy who thought 10 months in meant he had something solid. No drama, no games, just a normal relationship heading somewhere real. His girlfriend told him she was going out with friends on Saturday. He said cool, had his own plans, didn't give it a second thought. Then he saw one Instagram story, one photo. And when he brought it up the next day, calm, no accusations, just a direct question, she said something back that answered everything. Not about what she did, about why she did it. Sit down for this one. My girlfriend said she was out with college friends. I found the Instagram story. What she admitted when I pushed made the decision easy. Nate, 29. I want to start somewhere most of these stories don't, which is by saying that me and Claire were actually good. Not kind of good, not fine if you squint good. Genuinely solid, or at least that's what I had built my understanding of the whole relationship on. I need to put that up front because the story is harder to make sense of without it. When something ends with a blow-up, the noise tells you why. When things go quiet and just sort of dissolve, you have to sit down and actually think. Claire was 27 when all this happened. I was 29. We'd been together about 10 months total. Met through a mutual friend the previous summer. One of those cookout situations where you don't expect to meet anyone worth remembering. And then you end up talking in someone's backyard until it's dark and most of the party has moved inside. She was sharp, dry humor, the kind that takes you a full beat to catch, which I liked because it meant she wasn't performing it. She kept her own schedule, had her own friendships and a life that existed before me, didn't require constant attention or reassurance. There's a difference between someone who's actually independent and someone who's just distant. Claire was the first one. Present when we were together, fully. She just didn't need to be together every waking hour, which honestly was a feature for me, not a bug. The first few months were easy. I don't mean nothing bad has happened yet, easy. I mean genuinely smooth, the kind of rhythm you don't have to work at. By month 5 or 6, I was meeting her people. She'd been introduced to my family over dinner, and we'd stopped doing the thing where you avoid defining anything because it's too early. It just was what it was, and what it was felt real. I remember a weekend in early fall where we drove a couple hours up north to visit a state park she'd been wanting to see since before we met. I don't love hiking, I'll be straight about that. But she wasn't asking for overnight camping, just trails and some fresh air, so I went. We walked for a few hours, grabbed sandwiches from this small place near the trailhead, sat at a picnic table while it was slightly too cold to be comfortable, and neither of us suggested leaving. Drove back that evening and talked the whole way about nothing in particular. Something about a TV show she was watching. Something about a work situation I was dealing with. Some dumb bit we ended up repeating between ourselves for weeks after. I remember sitting in the car on the way back thinking, quietly, something like, yeah, I could do this for a long time. Not a big moment. Not a revelation. Just a guy in a car noticing that he was genuinely happy with who was sitting next to him. By fall, the future was coming up in small, practical ways. She'd mentioned her lease was up in the spring. I'd mentioned mine wasn't far off. We'd let those two facts sit next to each other and neither of us would change the subject. She made a comment once. We were walking somewhere near downtown, can't remember exactly where. Something like, we should actually look at that complex. They have decent square footage for the price. I said, yeah, probably. Not as a hypothetical, as something on a real list. I say all of that because I also want to be clear about who I am in a relationship. I've been cheated on once before, early 20s, and I made a conscious decision after that to not carry it forward into everything that came after. Took me a couple years to actually do it, but I did it. I'm not the guy who checks his girlfriend's phone, needs hourly location updates, or treats every male friend like a standing threat. I've been that guy briefly, in the immediate fallout of a bad situation, and it made me worse. Made the relationship worse, made everything worse. The jealous, controlling thing didn't work for me, and I had no interest in going back to it. So when Claire mentioned Kyle early on, I genuinely filed it away and moved on. Not because I was performing being unbothered by it, because I actually was. Past is past. She was with me now. That was the whole thing. I'm telling you all of this because I need you to understand that I was not walking into that Saturday, looking for a crack in anything. I wasn't carrying unresolved baggage from the cheating situation years back, wasn't running Claire through some internal audit, wasn't sitting around cataloging moments that felt slightly off. I was, by every reasonable measure, just a guy in a relationship that was going well, heading to his brother's place, not thinking about any of this. I wasn't monitoring her, wasn't carrying any unresolved suspicion. I was just a guy in a relationship he believed in, heading to his brother's to watch a game, not thinking about Claire's evening at all. She mentioned early in the afternoon that she was going out with some college friends, a group she'd talked about before, people she'd known for years, some from her first year of school. I didn't ask any follow-up questions because there was nothing to ask. She said she'd probably be back late, kissed me on the way out, and that was the end of the conversation. I got to my brother's around 6. We watched the game, ordered wings, stayed later than planned, because it actually turned into a good one. I drove home around 10:30, let myself in, made something to eat, leftover rice, little turkey from the deli earlier that week, nothing worth describing, and sat on the couch while something played on TV that I wasn't really watching. One of those late night situations where you're not tired enough to sleep, but not awake enough to do anything real. I picked up my phone and started going through it. That's when I saw the post. One of Claire's college friends had put something up on her Instagram story from that night. Group photo, restaurant with low lighting, bunch of people grinning at the camera. The caption said, "Happy birthday, Kyle," with a string of exclamation points and a cake emoji. I stopped scrolling. I need to explain why that hit me the way it did. I knew about Kyle. Claire had mentioned him twice, maybe 3 times, early on the way people do when they're filling in their history. Here's who I was with. Here's how it ended. Here's where things stand. They dated for about 3 years, broke up around a year before her and I got together. She described it as mutual, said they were on okay terms but not really active or close. I'd taken that at face value and didn't bring it up again, because there was nothing to bring up. I'm genuinely not someone who treats a girlfriend's ex like a standing threat. Been in relationships where that jealousy took over and it didn't serve anyone. But here's what was sitting with me as I looked at that photo. She told me she was out with friends. Not that it was a birthday, not whose birthday, and definitely not that it was the birthday of the guy she dated seriously for 3 years. She was right there in the shot, right next to him. Was I instantly convinced something shady was going on? Honestly, no. I wasn't. I'm not built that way. But the omission was loud in a way that was hard to think past. There's a specific thing that happens in your brain when someone leaves out information they obviously had. You don't spiral to the worst conclusion right away, you just notice the shape of the gap. And the shape of this one was clear. She knew who Kyle was to her. She knew I knew who Kyle was. And she chose out with college friends over going to my ex's birthday. Those are 2 different sentences. Choosing one over the other is a decision. I sat there for a while after that. Not angry, not in a full overthink spiral, just sitting with this quiet awareness that something wasn't quite right. I thought about texting her, just a casual "Hey, how's the night?" and stopped myself because I wasn't sure what I was trying to confirm by doing that, and I didn't want to make a move until I'd actually thought. I went through a few different explanations in my head. Maybe she genuinely thought it wasn't a big deal, and it slipped her mind. Maybe she'd mentioned Kyle so briefly in our early conversations that she didn't realize I knew who he was. Maybe it just didn't occur to her that I'd want to know. But every time I worked through one of those, I kept coming back to the same thing. She knew. She knew who Kyle was, and she knew that I knew who Kyle was, and she made a choice about what to tell me. That's a different category from forgetting. I went to bed without texting her. Stayed with it overnight. Let myself actually process it before I said anything. Hold on. I'm pausing for the listeners. This is me, not Nate. Because someone's going to say it's just a birthday party. And look, maybe. But if Claire knew it was nothing, why did she say out with friends instead of Kyle's birthday, whole group? Just figured I'd mention it? She had that sentence. She chose a different one. That's not forgetting to mention something. That's Princess Plausible Deniability, issuing a selective press release about her Saturday plans. And here's the tell. She had already projected this exact conversation before she left. She knew it was coming and decided to gamble. We know this because she's about to say it out loud. She came over the next morning around noon. We grabbed coffee, walked around for a bit, normal Sunday stuff. She seemed relaxed and genuinely easy to be around, which, if I'm honest, almost made me let it go. It would have been simple to just absorb it, file it somewhere, tell myself I was overthinking a birthday party. Part of me wanted that. But I've been in situations before where I talked myself out of something that turned out to matter, and I wasn't going to do that again. I waited for a natural gap in the conversation and said, "Hey, were you at Kyle's birthday thing last night?" Flat tone. No setup, no, we need to talk. Just a direct question. She looked up and I could see her doing something behind her eyes for half a second. Then she said, yeah, and right on top of it. It wasn't a big deal. It was a whole group thing. I didn't think it mattered. I said I wish she'd mentioned it beforehand. That was the complete scope of my ask. Not, why were you there? Not, are you still into him? Not any of the stuff you'd actually say if you were being accusatory. Just, I would have wanted to know, and you could have said something. That's it. She got defensive fast. Said I was making something out of nothing, that it wasn't like she was hiding it. Then she said I clearly didn't trust her, which is a specific pivot I want to name, because it's a recognizable move. When you're caught omitting something, a common response is to reframe the whole situation as the other person's trust issue. Suddenly the problem isn't what she chose not to tell me. The problem is that I'm asking about it at all. That's a sleight of hand and I wasn't going to follow it down that road. I let her finish and said, I do trust you. This isn't about trust. You made a choice not to mention this to me, and I want to understand why. She went quiet for a second. Then, and this is the part that I kept replaying, she said, this is exactly what I was worried about. I let that sit. Then, keeping it completely even, I said, if you were already worried about my reaction, that means you knew this was something I'd want to know. She didn't answer that. She just looked slightly past me. The conversation didn't escalate. No yelling, no ultimatums, no dramatic anything. It just ran out of road without actually going anywhere, and she left a couple hours after that. The rest of Sunday felt heavy in a way that was different from the aftermath of a regular fight. More like we'd had a conversation that revealed something, and we were both going through the rest of the day knowing it had been revealed, and neither of us was quite ready to look directly at what it meant. Wait! This is exactly what I was worried about. Everyone stop. An innocent person caught in a genuine oversight says, my bad, I should have mentioned it. She said I already ran this scenario in my head before I left the house and decided to skip it anyway. She thought about telling him. She weighed his reaction. She decided her Saturday night comfort was worth more than his right to basic information. That's not a slip. That's a deliberate call delivered with zero guilt, and now annoyed it's being reviewed. This isn't a communication gap. It's an operating procedure. She's the editor. He's the audience. Nate's starting to understand what that means. The next few days looked normal from the outside and felt wrong from the inside. We texted like usual. Grabbed dinner midweek at the Thai place we'd been going to for months. I got the same thing I always got. She tried something new. We talked about it for 5 minutes, and it was fine. All of it was fine, and neither of us mentioned the conversation from Sunday. Watched something at her apartment on Thursday. She fell asleep on the couch halfway through, and I sat there in her living room with the credits rolling thinking about what I was actually dealing with. Turned the TV off, grabbed my jacket, and let myself out without waking her up. Texted her that I'd taken off. She texted back a sleepy, okay, see you soon. Normal stuff. All of it perfectly normal. Surface level intact. But there was a background frequency that hadn't been there before. This low, persistent hum of something off. And both of us obviously felt it, and neither of us was addressing it directly. She didn't bring up the conversation. I didn't push because I was still trying to get whatever was bothering me into one precise sentence before I opened the topic again. There was one moment that Wednesday, and this goes nowhere, but it stuck with me as one of those details that just sort of captures the week. My brother texted me in the afternoon, completely unprompted, a photo of some ridiculous bumper sticker he'd seen in a parking lot. Didn't say anything, just the photo. I laughed for the first time in 4 days. Then I put my phone down and went back to the thing I'd been trying to put into words. By Wednesday, I had it. It wasn't Kyle. I had no concerns about him as a person, no evidence of anything, no basis to build a case on. What was sitting heavy in my chest was something more specific. The feeling that she had made an editorial decision about what I was allowed to know. That she had looked at the situation, looked at me, and decided that managing my reaction was a cleaner path than being straight with me. That I was a variable to be managed, not a person to be trusted with information. That's a precise thing. And once you have a name for it, you start looking backward through your memory with fresh eyes. Times she'd been a little vague about her plans, until the window for it to matter had closed. Topics that moved on faster than they needed to. Moments where the explanation I got felt like it had already been trimmed before it reached me. Nothing I could have pointed to before and called a lie. But now it all had the same shape. The same calculation being made over and over about what I could handle. I thought about whether I was being unfair. Genuinely ran that question. Because I know myself well enough to know that I can sometimes talk myself into seeing patterns that aren't fully there, especially when I'm already unsettled about something. So I tried to poke holes in my own red, tried to construct the most generous version of her POV. And the most generous version I could land on was, she genuinely thought I'd overreact. She didn't want to deal with the drama. She made a judgment call that was wrong in retrospect. That's the kindest frame I could put on it. But even that version still requires believing that she thought hiding it was better than just having the conversation. And I wasn't okay with that either. I want to be straight about who I am here. I'm not a controlling person. Never have been. I don't need to pre-approve Claire's friends, her schedule, her history. But there's a meaningful difference between trusting someone and being managed by someone. Those two things feel different. One of them is a relationship. The other one is a version of a relationship with an editorial process you don't know about. That Friday, we got dinner at the Thai place. One of those meals where both people are performing normalcy with slightly too much effort, laughed at things, talked about things that didn't matter, kept the engine running. Then she asked how work was going, and I told her. I'd had a decent week, landed a small win on a project I'd been grinding on for a while. She said, "That's great," and went back to her food. In a normal week, she would have asked a follow-up. Not because she was obligated to, just because that's what she did. She was genuinely curious about my work, always had been. That one missing follow-up question said more than I could have explained to someone from the outside. She was present, but not quite there. I was present, but not quite there. We split the check without discussing it, and she drove herself home. The weekend after was quiet in a specific way I didn't have a word for. We saw each other both days, but something was slightly misaligned the entire time, like two instruments playing the same song in slightly different keys. Conversations that used to have a natural back and forth now kind of dropped in the middle. There was a moment Saturday afternoon where she laughed at something on TV, and it felt so completely normal that I almost convinced myself I'd built the whole thing up in my head. Then the show ended, and neither of us said anything, and the weight came back. Cracks in a wall don't mean the house is down. They just mean you know what's inside the wall now. We had a brief non-conversation near the end of that week where she said she hoped we could get past it, that she really hadn't thought it would land the way it did. I said sure, yeah, probably. And I meant it in the moment. I genuinely wanted to move forward. But I kept noticing that every exchange we had on the subject ended with her trying to smooth the surface down and move on, not actually engaging with what was underneath. And you can't patch something you won't look at directly. Pause. What she's running is called the clock-out strategy. No acknowledgement, no actual apology. Just stay close enough to the normal routine until the awkwardness fades and the thing gets quietly buried. It works on guys who find friction more exhausting than resolution, who'd rather absorb something than deal with it. Nate is not that type. He's the quiet thinking kind. Processes slowly, doesn't react emotionally. And here's what nobody tells you about guys like that. When they finally arrive at a conclusion, it's not a reaction, it's a verdict. Claire is about to find that out in a very calm room. We had the real conversation the following Saturday. I'd spent the better part of 2 weeks sitting with everything, longer than I probably needed to, honestly, but I wanted to be sure I wasn't just reacting. Wanted to know that when I sat down with her, I was saying something I'd actually thought through and not just something I felt in the moment. I asked her to come over. We sat down in the living room, no TV on, no phones out. I told her straight up, what was bothering me wasn't the party, wasn't Kyle, wasn't any of the surface stuff. It was the decision she made about what to tell me. And I'd been thinking about why she'd made that call, and I kept arriving at the same answer every time. I wanted to hear it from her before I trusted my own read. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said it. She didn't tell me because she knew how I'd react. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was offering a practical explanation for a practical decision. Like I should have understood the logic behind it. And honestly, the delivery was the most revealing part of the whole thing. No guilt in it. No, I know that was wrong. Just, here's the calculation I made, and it made sense to me. Because what she was actually saying, stripped of the packaging, was, I looked at this situation, I looked at you, and I determined it was more efficient to go around you than to trust you with the information. I assessed your reaction in advance, judged it not worth the trouble, and made a quiet, unilateral call about what you were allowed to know about your own girlfriend's life. Not because something bad happened, just because having the straight conversation would have required dealing with your feelings for 10 minutes, and I decided that wasn't worth it. And we'd been talking about moving in together. I want to let that sit for a second before I continue, because it matters. At the point where Claire was pre-deciding that she wouldn't tell me things, because she'd already judged my reactions, we were mid-discussion about sharing a lease. I had been operating in good faith on information that had already been filtered. The version of the relationship I thought I was in, it had a whole layer I didn't know about. I didn't unload all of that. Didn't need to. I just sat with it for a moment, and then said, calmly, that I didn't want to be with someone who felt like she needed to pre-screen what I could handle. That I'd rather have the uncomfortable 5-minute conversation up front than be managed from a distance. That if she'd texted me on Friday, hey, going to Kyle's birthday this weekend, whole group, just wanted you to know, it would have been completely fine. A non-issue. The thing that made it an issue was the decision not to say it. That specific decision. She didn't fight it. I think she could tell by that point that I wasn't going to be reasoned out of this, and to her credit, she didn't try to manufacture a counter-argument just for the sake of winning the room. We just sat there together in that particular quiet that happens when two people have both arrived at the same conclusion by different routes and are acknowledging it for the first time. She left about an hour later. We hugged at the door, which was the right and also completely surreal thing to do, and then I was alone in my apartment. Real quick. I didn't tell you because I knew how you'd react. Understand what that sentence actually is. Not an apology, not an explanation, it's an operational disclosure. She's telling him she runs a pre-screening process on what she shares with him, that his reactions are a variable she manages around, that she's the editor and he's the audience who gets the approved version. And she said it like it was logical, like obviously. That's not a communication style mismatch. That's a fundamentally different understanding of what honesty in a relationship means. You can't workshop your way out of that. You just decide what to do with it. Nate decided. Final update. It's been a few weeks. I've had enough time and enough quiet to sit with the whole thing properly, and I want to be honest with anyone reading this. I've genuinely asked myself whether I overreacted. Not in a desperately seeking permission to feel bad way. Just honestly. It was a birthday party. She was there with a group. Nothing happened that I can point to. And there's probably somebody reading this thinking, I turned something small into something it didn't need to be. But here's where I land every single time I work through it. She didn't tell me because she knew how I'd react. That sentence has a whole infrastructure under it. It means she thought about telling me and made a deliberate choice not to. It means she'd already projected my reaction, decided it wasn't worth dealing with, and went with the edited version. It means that somewhere in those 10 months, including the months where we were casually talking about sharing an apartment, she had been running that same calculation on a regular basis, deciding what I could and couldn't handle, deciding what version of her life I received. That is not the relationship I thought I was in. And once you see that, you start understanding smaller things differently. Not in a paranoid, everything was a lie kind of way. More like, you know how you can look at a room and think it looks clean, and then someone turns on a different light and you see all the dust you weren't seeing before? None of the dust is new. It was always there. You just didn't have the right angle until now. I went back through memories that had felt slightly off in the moment and understood them differently. Not dramatically, just more accurately. That's its own kind of uncomfortable, but it's also useful. I'd rather see the room clearly than keep fumbling around in a light that flatters the wrong things. I want to be fair to her because she deserves that. She's not a bad person. I genuinely don't think that. I think she made a very human calculation. Take the path of least resistance, avoid the uncomfortable conversation, only deal with fallout if it ever actually surfaces. That is a rational short-term choice. A lot of people make it, but I don't want to be with someone who makes it toward me as a pattern. I want to be with someone who trusts me enough to just say the thing, even when the thing is mildly uncomfortable. Hey, my ex's birthday is this weekend and I'm going with a group. That's 5 seconds of conversation. I would have said okay and had a normal rest of my night. The choice not to say it is the whole story. And here's what I've been sitting with since. That choice didn't happen in a vacuum. She made it confidently. She delivered the reasoning behind it without any guilt in her voice. That means this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a practiced approach. She was comfortable operating that way, which means she'd been operating that way for a while, probably across a lot of small decisions I never even knew were being made. That's the part that's hard to shake. Not any specific thing she did, but the understanding that I was receiving an edited version of our relationship without knowing it. The breakup was quiet. No scene, nobody said anything cruel, nobody tried to win a final argument. It had more of an acknowledgement feel than a fight feel, like two people who both understood what had come to light and were done pretending the foundation was fine. We sat there for a while after the main conversation was over, not really saying much. The room doing that specific thing rooms do when the decision has already been made, but nobody stood up yet. She asked if I was okay. I said I'd be all right. She picked up her bag, looked at me for a second, and then left. I closed the door. I stood in my kitchen for a while doing nothing in particular, and then I texted my brother about the weekend. Actually, his game got pushed to Sunday, not Saturday. I keep writing Saturday out of habit. Whatever, that's not the point. The point is, I'm moving forward. The short-term part stings. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. 10 months is real time with a real person you genuinely liked, and that doesn't just evaporate because the ending was quiet instead of loud. I've had louder endings that hurt less because at least they were clean. This one requires a little more processing because it was good until it wasn't, and the moment it stopped being good was the moment I found out something true instead of something dramatic. Which is its own weird thing to carry, but I'm carrying it fine. And it was something, at least from my end. But ending something when you understand why you're doing it is different from ending something when you're just in pain and reacting. There's no second-guessing clarity. You just absorb the short term and keep going. The thing I'll say that I haven't said yet is this: the moving in conversation. We'd been having early versions of it for months, which means there was a stretch of time where I was putting actual weight behind this relationship, letting myself build towards something I believed in. And she was simultaneously running an editorial process on the information I received about her own life. I sat in my kitchen the night she left and thought about that for a long time. I don't know what to do with that piece. Probably nothing. There's no action to take and no conclusion that makes it easier. Some threads just don't tie up clean. Real life's got more loose ends than people like to admit, and this is one of them. I'm all right. Routine is back. Sleeping fine. Not spending my nights rereading old messages looking for patterns I missed. I asked myself whether I overreacted. I looked at the actual evidence. The answer was no. I trusted my gut when it told me something was off. I gave it enough time to be sure I wasn't just being reactive. I let the conversation run until I got a real answer, and then I acted on that answer. That's the whole thing. Not dramatic, not loud, not some big production. Just a guy who noticed something, asked about it, got an honest answer for once, and made a decision with it. I don't know what else you do. If someone tells you how they operate, you either accept that operating system or you don't. I didn't, and I'd make the same call again. Look, Nate didn't make a big move here. No scorched earth, no revenge play, no calling Kyle, none of that. He asked a calm question, got a half answer, sat with it, pushed once more, and when the real answer came out, he didn't argue, didn't beg, just made a quiet decision and walked away with his dignity intact. Sometimes that's the whole move. Not because it's soft, but because it's clear. She told him she hid it because she knew how he'd react. He reacted by not negotiating with that. That's self-respect without a receipt. Drop your thoughts below. Would you have stayed or called it? And hit subscribe if you haven't already. New one every day.